Arthur's wedding day became his worst nightmare when the man he loved rejected him 30 minutes before the ceremony. Because he couldn't walk, abandoned, humiliated, broken, but then a stranger appeared in that church garden, a single father who would do something so unexpected, so powerful that it would rewrite both their destinies. The sound hit Hud first, deep gasping sobs that seemed to tear through the spring air like a wound opening. He froze mid-steps, his hand on his daughter's shoulder just outside the side entrance of Redwood Creek Community Church in Montana. It was the kind of crying that made your chest tighten, the kind that spoke of something shattered beyond repair. "Daddy, what's that sound?" 6-year-old Willow whispered, her eyes wide, clutching her light pink dress. Hugh hesitated. They were here for a birthday party. His daughter's classmate was celebrating in the community hall at 2:00. It was May 14th, 2023, a beautiful Saturday morning, and they had arrived early to help set up. This wasn't their business, whatever was happening around that corner in the side garden of the church had nothing to do with them. But the crying continued, raw, desperate, the sound of someone whose world had just collapsed. "Stay right here, sweetheart," Hud said quietly, positioning Willow by the door. "Don't move, I'll be right back." He walked around the corner and stopped dead. A man sat in a wheelchair in the church garden, surrounded by fallen white rose petals. He was wearing a sharp black groom suit and a dark brown cowboy hat that was tilted down, shadowing his face. A train of sorrow seemed to pull around his wheelchair like melting snow. His hair was neatly styled, and it was clear that painstaking care had been taken for this day, a day that was now being washed away by tears. He was completely alone on what was obviously supposed to be his wedding day. The man's hands trembled as they gripped the arms of his wheelchair. His shoulders shook with each sob. He hadn't noticed Hud yet, lost in his own devastation. And Hud stood there frozen, uncertain whether to approach or retreat, whether his presence would be an intrusion or a kindness. The decision was made for him when the man looked up. His hazel eyes met Reese's, and for a moment they just stared at each other. He looked startled, then embarrassed, then resigned, as if he'd already lost so much dignity today that one more witness to his pain hardly mattered. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice broken. "I didn't think anyone would see me out here." Reese, in his red cold shirt, took a cautious step forward. "Are you okay?" The moment the words left his mouth, he wanted to take them back. He was clearly not okay. Nothing about this scene suggested okay. A bitter, hollow laugh escaped the man's throat. "Am I okay?" He gestured at himself. The suit, the wheelchair, the tears, the garden that should have been filled with wedding guests, but was empty except for the two of them. Today was supposed to be my wedding day. I'm in my suit. The guests are arriving, and my fiancé just told me 30 minutes ago that he can't marry me. The words landed like a physical blow. "He can't do it," he continued, his voice wavering between rage and heartbreak. "He looked me in the eyes this morning and told me he can't marry me. Not because he doesn't love me, not because we're not compatible, but because of this." He slapped the arm of his wheelchair. "Sound sharp in the quiet garden. Because I can't walk." Hud felt his stomach drop. "What? He can't marry someone in a wheelchair?" The man said, each word deliberate and cutting. He said he tried. He said he really, really tried to be okay with it, but looking at me in this suit, knowing I'd never walk down the aisle the way we'd planned, knowing our future would be complicated, he couldn't do it, so he left, just walked out of the church, left me here in this suit in front of 200 people. The silence that followed was suffocating. Reese stood there, this complete stranger in a church garden, watching a man's world disintegrate in real time. He'd experienced pain in his life, the kind that carved deep grooves into your soul. But this being rejected on your wedding day, in your wedding suit for something completely beyond your control, This was a cruelty he couldn't fathom. 8 months ago, the man said suddenly, his voice quieter now, almost detached. I was working on a ranch. I loved my job. I loved the animals. I was good at what I did. He stared at his hands, at the engagement ring still on his finger. There was an accident. A piece of heavy equipment malfunctioned and collapsed on me. The weight, it crushed my spine. The surgery saved my life, but he trailed off, his jaw tightening. I'm paralyzed. From the waist down, I'll never walk again. Reese's heart cracked a little wider. Gideon, my fiancé, he said he'd stay. He visited me in the hospital. He held my hand during rehab. He said it didn't matter, that we'd get through this together. We postponed the wedding for 6 months so I could focus on recovery. He seemed supportive. He said all the right things and I believed him. I thought he meant it, but he didn't. The word no came out like a sigh, like the last bit of air leaving a deflating balloon. 3 weeks ago, I started noticing changes. Small things. He stopped holding my hand. He'd flinch when he had to help me with the wheelchair. When he looked at me, there was this doubt in his eyes, but I told myself I was imagining it. I wanted so badly to believe he loved me enough. He wiped at his face with the back of his hand, smearing dirt across his cheek. This morning, I was in the groom's room with my brother Flynn. Getting ready, I was nervous but excited, and then Gideon walked in. He wasn't supposed to see me before the ceremony. Bad luck, you know, a bitter laugh. He said he needed to talk and he told me he couldn't do it, that he'd been trying to convince himself for months that he could handle this, but he couldn't, that he wanted a normal life with a normal husband. The last words came out strangled, and fresh tears spilled down his face. He said he was sorry, as if sorry could fix this, as if sorry could undo the fact that he's been lying to me for months, that he let me plan this whole wedding, let me believe in us, let me be here today thinking I was about to marry the love of my life, when all along he was just trying to find the courage to abandon me. Reese felt anger rising in his chest, not at this man but at the man who done this to him, at the cowardice it took to wait until the wedding day itself to break someone's heart, at the cruelty of letting him hope right up until the last possible moment. But anger wouldn't help him now. I'm so sorry, Hud said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. The man looked at him, really looked at him, as if trying to understand why the stranger was still standing here listening to his pain. The worst part, he said, his voice cracking, is that everyone will understand. They'll say Gideon was brave for trying. They'll say it's understandable that he couldn't handle being married to someone disabled. They'll pity me, poor paralyzed Arthur rejected at the altar. For the rest of my life, this will be my story, the groom who was left because he couldn't walk. Arthur, so that was his name. That won't be your story, Hud heard himself say. Arthur looked at him skeptically. How do you know? Because you get to decide what your story is, Reese said firmly. Not him, not the people inside that church. What happened today doesn't define you. It defines him. It shows who he is. And it's not pretty, but it doesn't say anything about your worth. Arthur's eyes filled with fresh tears, but something in his expression shifted slightly. That's easy to say when you're not the one sitting in the wheelchair. You're right, Hud acknowledged. I can't know what you're feeling right now, but I do know what it's like to be abandoned by someone who promised to stay. The words hung in the air between them. Arthur studied his face and Hud could see his mind working, trying to piece together what he meant. I'm a single father. My daughter, the little girl I told to wait by the door, her name is Willow. She's 6 years old and she has epilepsy. Understanding flickered across Arthur's face. Her mother left us when Willow was 2. Hud continued, the old wounds still tender even after 4 years. She said she wasn't ready for the responsibility, said she couldn't handle the seizures, the hospital visits, the constant worry. She wanted a different life, so she walked away just like that. Left both of us. I am sorry, Arthur whispered. Hud shook his head. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because I understand what it feels like when someone you love decides. You're not worth the difficulty when they choose convenience over commitment. And I'm telling you that it says everything about them and nothing about you. Arthur's hands had stopped trembling. He was listening now. Really. Listening. For a long time after my wife left, I thought maybe she was right. Hugh admitted, maybe I wasn't enough. Maybe Willow and I were too much work. Maybe we didn't deserve someone who would stay, but then I realized something. What? Arthur asked softly. Love, Rael. Love isn't about finding someone when life is easy. It's about choosing to stay when life gets hard. It's about looking at someone's challenges and saying, I'm here, I'm not going anywhere. Your fiancé failed that test, but that doesn't mean you're not worthy of someone who will pass it. The garden fell quiet except for the distant sound of birds and the rustle of leaves in the spring breeze. Arthur looked down at his engagement ring. Then slowly, deliberately, he pulled it off his finger and set it in his lap. Gideon told me this morning that he wanted a normal husband, someone who could walk beside him, someone whose life wouldn't require accommodations or adjustments, someone easier. Then he wanted the wrong things, Hud said simply. Before Arthur could respond, they heard small footsteps and both turned to see Willow peeking around the corner. She'd clearly ignored her father's instruction to stay put. Daddy, you've been gone a long time. Then her eyes landed on Arthur. They went wide. Wow, you look like a real cowboy, despite everything. Despite the tears and the heartbreak and the ruined wedding, Arthur laughed. It was small and watery, but it was real. Thank you, sweetie, Arthur said. I'm Arthur, I'm Willow, the little girl. Walked closer, completely unfazed by the wheelchair, the tears, or the dramatic scene she'd stumbled into. Why are you sad? Cowboys aren't supposed to be sad. Sometimes even cowboys have bad days, Arthur said gently. Willow considered this seriously, then nodded. My daddy always says bad days don't last forever, and that the sun always comes back even after the rain. Hud felt his heart swell with pride at his daughter's kindness. That's very wise, Arthur said. Can I sit with you? Willow asked. You look like you could use a friend, and without waiting for permission, Willow plopped down on the grass beside Arthur's wheelchair, reached out and gently touched the brim of his dark brown cowboy hat. This is so cool, Willow said. Did someone special give it to you? My grandpa did, Arthur said softly. A long time ago. Before he didn't finish the sentence, but Willow seemed to understand that something sad had happened. Well, I think you look handsome, Willow declared with the absolute certainty that only a 6-year-old could muster. And I think whoever made you sad was wrong. Arthur's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they weren't entirely sad. He looked at this little girl who'd appeared out of nowhere, offering uncomplicated kindness with no expectations attached, and something inside his chest loosened just slightly. Hugh watched his daughter and this heartbroken stranger, and he made a decision that would have seemed insane to anyone else. He sat down in the grass, right there in his jeans on the ground beside Willow, making their small circle complete. Arthur stared at him in surprise. You don't have to, I know, but I'm going to anyway. And so they sat there, the three of them, in that church garden on what should have been Arthur's wedding day. The sun filtered through the trees overhead, rose petals scattered around them like fallen snow. And for the first time since Gideon had walked out, Arthur didn't feel completely alone. What's your favorite animal? Willow asked suddenly, her voice bright and curious. Arthur blinked, caught off guard by the question. I work with animals actually, or I did before the accident. I'm a ranch hand. I love horses. Really? Willow's face lit up. We have a dog at home named Biscuit. He's old and he sleeps a lot, but he's really Nice, I love dogs, Arthur said, and for the first time that morning his smile reached his eyes. Maybe you could meet Biscuit sometime, Willow said matter-of-factly. He makes people feel better when they're sad. Daddy says that's his superpower. Hud met Arthur's eyes over Willow's head and something passed between them, an understanding, a connection, a possibility neither of them had expected. Footsteps approached from the church and Arthur's brother appeared again. Flynn looked exhausted, his face pale and drawn, when he saw Arthur sitting with Hud and Willow. Confusion flickered across his features. Ash, Flynn said, we really need to figure out what to do. Mom and Dad are inside with the wedding coordinator. Most of the guests have left, but there are still some people asking questions, and he stopped, noticing for the first time that Arthur wasn't crying anymore. Are you okay? Flynn asked carefully. No, Arthur said honestly, but I will be. Give me just a few more minutes. Flynn glanced at Hud and Willow, clearly trying to piece together what was happening. Reese stood up and offered him a nod of reassurance, a silent message that his brother was safe, that they weren't here to cause harm or gawk at tragedy. Flynn seemed to understand. A few more minutes, he agreed softly. Then we need to get you out of that suit and go home. After Flynn disappeared back into the church, Willow turned to Arthur with sudden determination. You know what? The little girl announced. I think we should have a party right here. A happy party to make up for the sad one in Willow reared, but Arthur interrupted. Actually, that sounds perfect. Willow beamed and immediately started gathering rose petals from the ground, arranging them in a small pile. These can be decorations. And Daddy, you have your phone, right? Can we play music? Hugh pulled out his phone, scrolling through his playlist. What kind of music do cowboys like? Arthur's laugh was genuine. This time, I haven't been asked that question in a very long time. Then it's about time someone asked, Hud said in. He pressed play. Soft acoustic music drifted from his phone speaker. Nothing grand or dramatic, just gentle guitar and a warm voice singing about new beginnings. Willow handed Arthur a small bouquet of rose petals she'd arranged. Every cowboy needs flowers, she said. Seriously. Arthur accepted them, holding the delicate petals in his palm, and something shifted inside him. This wasn't the wedding he'd planned. This wasn't the celebration he'd imagined. But in this strange, unexpected moment, sitting in a garden with a kind stranger and his daughter, he felt something he hadn't felt in months. He felt seen, not as the man in the wheelchair, not as the rejected groom, not as someone to pity or fix or carefully avoid, just as. Arthur, thank you, he whispered, looking at Hud. You didn't have to stop, you didn't have to stay, you didn't have to do any of this. Yes, I did, Rehes said quietly. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is just show up, even when it's not our place, even when it's uncomfortable, especially. Then Arthur studied his face, the sincerity in his eyes, the gentle way he spoke, the ease with which he'd sat down in the grass beside a crying stranger. This man, whoever he was, understood something fundamental about kindness that Gideon had never grasped, that it wasn't about grand gestures or perfect words. It was about presence, about staying, about sitting in the mess with someone and not running away. I don't even know your name, Arthur said suddenly, realizing they'd been sitting here for 20 minutes and he'd never asked. He said, Rahanovan. Well, Reese Donovan, you might have just saved my life today. I didn't save anything, Hud said gently. I just reminded you of what you already know, that you're stronger than this moment and that what happened today doesn't get to write the rest of your story. They sat together a while longer, the three of them, as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Willow chattered about school and Biscuit the dog and her favorite books. Arthur found himself actually listening, actually engaging, actually feeling something other than crushing despair. When it was finally time to go, when Arthur's parents emerged from the church, Looking weary and worried, Hud stood up and brushed grass from his jeans. I should let you go, but before I do, can I give you something? Arthur nodded. Hugh pulled a small notepad from his pocket, scribbled something down, and handed him the paper. It was his phone number. I'm not trying to be weird or inappropriate, and there's no pressure, but if you ever need someone to talk to, someone who understands what it's like to be abandoned by someone who should have stayed, I'm here, even if it's just to listen. Arthur took the paper, his fingers trembling slightly. Why are you being so kind to me? You don't know me. Maybe that's exactly why. Because sometimes strangers can offer something that people who know us can't. Distance, objectivity, and the freedom to be honest without worrying about what they'll think of you tomorrow. He knelt down beside his wheelchair, not towering over him but meeting him at eye level. Quite literally, Arthur, I don't know what your life looks like from here. I don't know how long it'll take to heal from this, but I know you're going to be okay. I don't know how I know, but I do. And when you're ready, whether that's tomorrow or next month or next year, I hope you'll reach out because I think you're someone worth knowing. Tears streamed down Arthur's face, but they weren't the same tears as before. These were different, softer, mixed with something that felt almost like hope. Thank you, he whispered. Willow threw her arms around Arthur's shoulders in an impulsive hug, nearly knocking the bouquet of petals from his lap. Bye, Cowboy Arthur. I hope you feel better soon. Arthur hugged her back. This precious little girl who'd shown up and simply loved without conditions or hesitations. Bye, Willow. Thank you for my party. As Hud and Willow walked away, hand in hand, Arthur sat there with a piece of paper in his hand. He looked down at it, at the phone number, at the name written above it in neat handwriting, Reese Donovan. He didn't know if he'd call. He didn't know if he'd ever see him again. He didn't know anything except that for the first time since Gideon had walked out, he didn't feel completely broken. His father approached, his face etched with concern and barely suppressed rage at Gideon. Son, let's get you home. Arthur nodded, folding the paper carefully and tucking it into the pocket of his suit jacket right over his heart. As his father wheeled him toward the parking lot, he glanced back at the garden one more time, at the scattered rose petals, at the place where a stranger and his daughter had sat with him and refused to let him be alone. And he thought, maybe this isn't the end. Maybe it's just the beginning of something I didn't see coming. That evening, as Arthur sat in his apartment, finally out of the suit, wearing comfortable clothes, his phone buzzed. He picked it up, expecting another message from Flynn or his mother checking on him. Instead, it was an unknown number. Arthur, it's Hud. I just wanted to make sure you got home okay. No need to respond if you're not up for it. Just wanted you to know someone is thinking of you. Arthur stared at the message for a long moment. His first instinct was to ignore it, to throw the phone across the room and crawl into bed and never come out. But something stopped him. The memory of Hud sitting in the grass, the sincerity in his eyes, the way he'd spoken to him. Not with pity, but with respect. The way Willow had called him a cowboy and meant it. His fingers moved almost of their own accord. I'm home. Thank you for today, for stopping, for staying. It meant more than you know. He hit send before he could change his mind. 3 minutes later, his phone buzzed again. I'm Glow, and I meant what I said. If you need someone to talk to, I'm here. No expectations, just a friend who gets it. A friend. When was the last time someone had offered him that without wanting something in return? I might take you up on that. He typed, fair warning, I'm kind of a mess right now, aren't we all? Came the reply, get some rest, Arthur. Tomorrow is a new day. He set his phone down and leaned back against the couch, exhausted but no longer drowning. The apartment was quiet. The wedding that should have happened was over, and yet, somehow, impossibly, he felt the tiniest flicker of something in his chest. Not happiness, not yet, but maybe, just maybe, hope. The days that followed were brutal. Arthur had to return wedding gifts, field calls from concerned relatives who'd heard what happened, deal with the pitying looks from neighbors who'd seen the decorations being loaded into the church that morning, and put two and two together. Gideon sent one text, "I'm sorry. I hope you understand." He didn't respond. What was there to say? That he didn't understand, that sorry wasn't enough, that he destroyed him in a way he wasn't sure he'd recover from. Instead, he deleted his number and blocked him on every platform, but through it all Reese texted, not constantly, not intrusively, just there. "How are you today? Saw a horse that looked like it had opinions. Made me think of your ranch work. Willow wants to know if you're feeling better. She drew you a picture. Can I send it?" Each message was a lifeline, a small reminder that someone out there saw him as more than the tragic wedding story. On the 5th day after the wedding, that wasn't Arthur found himself actually looking forward to Reese's texts. They'd started talking more not about Gideon or the wedding, but about everything else: books, movies, the challenges of single parenthood, the frustrations of physical therapy, the small joys that still existed even in dark times. Hud told him about Willow's latest school project, about how she'd insisted on making a get-well-soon card for someone she just met, but already cared about. Arthur told him about his therapy sessions, about the anger he felt, about how some days he wanted to scream and other days he just wanted to disappear. And Hud never tried to fix it, never offered empty platitudes or toxic positivity. He just listened, and somehow that was exactly what he needed. 2 weeks after the garden, Hud sent a message that was different from the others. "Willow has a school event on Friday, nothing fancy. Just a little art show where the kids display their projects. She's been working on a painting and she's really proud of it. She asked if you'd want to come. No pressure at all, but I wanted to pass along the invitation." Arthur stared at the message for a long time. Going out, being around people, facing the world after everything that had happened terrified him. But something about the invitation, the casualness of it, the fact that it wasn't a grand gesture but a simple offer, made him want to say yes. "What time?" he typed. 6:00 p.m. at the elementary school. Fair warning, there will be juice boxes and very enthusiastic children. Arthur smiled, the first real smile he'd managed since the garden. "I think I can handle that." Friday evening arrived too quickly. Arthur spent an hour agonizing over what to wear, which was ridiculous because it was an elementary school art show, not a gala. But nothing felt right. Everything felt too formal or too casual or too much like trying too hard. Finally, he settled on jeans and a comfortable sweater. Simple, unpretentious, real. The school was buzzing with activity when he arrived. Parents milled around the hallway, admiring crayon drawings and clay sculptures displayed on tables. Children ran past high on sugar and excitement, and there near the back wall was Hud. He spotted him immediately and smiled, warm, genuine, relieved that he'd actually come. "You made it," he said, walking over. "I almost didn't," Arthur admitted. "But Willow invited me, and I don't break promises to 6-year-olds. Smart policy." Willow appeared a moment later, her face lighting up like a firework. "Arthur, you came." She threw her arms around Arthur without hesitation, and Arthur hugged her back, feeling something warm and healing in the embrace. "I wouldn't miss it," Arthur said. "I heard you made a painting. Come see, come see." Willow grabbed Arthur's hand and pulled him toward a small easel. The painting was abstract, swirls of color with bright sunbursts and what might have been flowers or possibly birds. In the corner, in careful child handwriting, was the title, "When Bad Days End, It's Beautiful." Arthur said softly, "Tell me about it." "Well," Willow began seriously, "the dark colors are the bad stuff, like when people are sad or scared or something hurts. But see the yellow and orange? That's when the bad day is ending and good things start happening because Daddy always says bad days end. They always do. Arthur felt his throat tighten. Your daddy is very smart, I know, Willow said proudly. For the next hour, Arthur found himself swept up in the simple joy of the evening. Will introduced him to friends. Rehe stayed close but not hovering, giving him space to breathe while making sure he never felt alone. When a few parents gave Arthur curious looks, noticing the wheelchair, maybe wondering who he was, Reese didn't draw attention to it, didn't make a big deal, just treated him like anyone else, which was, Arthur realized, all he'd ever wanted. As the evening wounded down and families started leaving, Hud walked Arthur to his car. Thank you for coming, he said. Willow hasn't stopped talking about you since that day at the church. She's an amazing kid. Arthur said, you're doing something very right. I'm doing my best, Ray said. That's all any of us can do. Arthur looked at him in the fading light of the parking lot. This man who'd appeared at the worst moment of his life and had quietly, consistently shown up ever since. Can I ask you something? He said suddenly. Anything. Why? Why did you stop that day? Why did you stay? Why are you still here texting me and inviting me to art shows and being kind to someone you barely know? Reese was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Because 4 years ago, when my wife left, I felt completely alone, like I was drowning and everyone else was on the shore watching but not helping. And I promised myself that if I ever saw someone drowning, I wouldn't just watch. I'd reach out, even if I was a stranger, even if it was awkward or inconvenient, because someone should have done that for me. And I can't go back and fix my past, but I can show up for someone else's present. Arthur felt tears gathering, but they weren't sad tears. They were something else, something softer. You saved me that day, he whispered. You don't think you did, but you did. You saved yourself, Hud said gently. I just reminded you that you could. Over the following weeks, something shifted. What had started as kindness evolved into friendship. Hud and Arthur began meeting for coffee, just casual conversations where they talked about everything and nothing. Will often joined them, coloring at the table while the adults talked. Arthur shared more about his life before the accident, his love for horses, his dreams of managing his own ranch someday, his fears that those dreams were over now. Hud listened and asked questions, and never once suggested that his wheelchair made those dreams impossible. Adaptations, he said simply when Arthur expressed doubt, not limitations. You find new ways to do the things you love. One afternoon, Arthur invited Hud and Willow to visit the adaptive equestrian therapy program where he'd started volunteering part-time. It was his first step back into the world he loved, and he was nervous about how it would go. Reese and Willow showed up with a homemade sign that read, "We're proud of you, Arthur." He'd cried when he saw it, happy tears this time. Watching Hud interact with the therapy horses, seeing how gentle he was with the animals and how patiently he helped Willow learn proper handling techniques, Arthur felt something stir in his chest. Something he thought was dead after Gideon. Attraction, interest, the flutter of possibility, but he pushed it down. It was too soon, too complicated. Hud was his friend and he couldn't risk losing that by wanting more. 3 months after the garden, Willow had a seizure. It happened late at night. Hugh called Arthur at 2:00 in the morning, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "I'm sorry to call so late," he said. "Willow had a bad one. We're at the hospital. She's stable now, but I needed to hear a friendly voice." "I'm on my way," Arthur said immediately. "You don't have to." "I'm on my way," he repeated firmly. He arrived at the hospital 40 minutes later, navigating the sterile hallways, until he found Hud in the waiting area. He looked exhausted, his hair disheveled, his eyes shadowed with the kind of fear that never fully left. Apparent in moments like these, Arthur wheeled himself over and took his hand. "She's okay," Reese said, more to convince himself than him. "The doctors say she's stable, but it was bad, Arthur, really bad. For a few minutes I thought he didn't finish the sentence. But she's okay," Arthur said firmly. "She's here. You're here, that's what matters." They sat together in the waiting room until the doctors allowed Hud back to see Willow. Arthur stayed, refusing to leave, even when Hud assured him he could go home. "You were there for me on my worst day, I'm here for yours." When dawn broke and Willow was finally released with instructions to rest and follow up with her neurologist, Hud drove Arthur home. They sat in his car outside his apartment building, both of them too tired to move. "Thank you," Hud said quietly, "for showing up, for staying. That's what friends do," Arthur said, but as he said it, he realized with startling clarity that friend wasn't the right word anymore. Somewhere between the garden and the art show and the hospital waiting room, something had shifted. He was falling for him. He was falling for Reese Donovan, this kind, patient, steadfast man who'd seen him at his lowest and hadn't turned away, who'd introduced him to his daughter without hesitation, who'd made space in his life for someone else's pain without expecting anything in return. And that terrified him, because what if he wasn't enough? What if, like Gideon, Hud eventually decided that being with someone in a wheelchair was too complicated, too difficult, too much? What if he opened his heart again and it got destroyed a second time? Days turned into weeks, and the dynamic between Arthur and Hud continued to evolve. They talked every day. They saw each other multiple times a week. Willow had started calling Arthur her bonus friend, and the three of them fell into an easy rhythm that felt almost like family. But Arthur kept his feelings locked away, safe, protected, behind walls that Gideon's abandonment had built, until one Saturday afternoon changed everything. Hud had invited Arthur to join them for a day at the park. It was late autumn now, 6 months since the garden, and the leaves were turning brilliant shades of red and gold. They'd packed a picnic, and Willow was running around collecting acorns while Hud and Arthur sat on a bench together. "Can I ask you something personal?" Hud said suddenly. Arthur felt his stomach flip. "Okay, that day at the church," he began carefully. "When I met you, you were at the absolute lowest point. And look at you now. You're volunteering, you're smiling, you're living. How did you do it?" Arthur thought about the question, really thought about it. "Honestly," he said, Reese looked surprised. "Me. You showed me that I was worth showing up for," Arthur said. "Gideon taught me that I was a burden, that loving me required too much sacrifice, but you just showed up. No drama, no grand gestures. You just kept being there, and gradually I started to believe that maybe I wasn't as broken as I thought." Hugh was quiet for a long moment. "Arthur," he said, "finally, can I tell you something that might be wildly inappropriate?" His heart started racing. "Yes, I didn't stop in that garden just to be kind," he said, his eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his breath catch. "I mean, I did, but it became something more. Over these past months, getting to know you, seeing who you are when you're not in crisis, I've realized something." "What?" he whispered. "I'm falling in love with you." The world seemed to tilt. "And I know that might be too much too soon," Reese continued quickly. "I know you're still healing from what Gideon did. I know there are 1,000 reasons why this is complicated, but I needed you to know, because I don't want to be your friend anymore. Arthur, I want to be more, and I need to know if that's even a possibility, or if I should." Arthur kissed him. He'd never been a particularly bold person, but in that moment, he didn't care about fear or consequences or the possibility of getting hurt again. He leaned forward and kissed Reese Donovan with everything he had. When they finally pulled apart, both of them breathing hard, Arthur laughed, a sound of pure joy that surprised even him. "Yes," he said. "Yes, it's a possibility. Yes, I'm falling for you." 2. Yes to all of it. Hugh's smile could have lit up the entire park. Willow chose that exact moment to run back over, waving a particularly large acorn. Look what I found. It's huge, and she stopped, noticing the way Hud and Arthur were looking at each other. Why are you both smiling so big? Because, Reese said, pulling his daughter into a hug while keeping one hand intertwined with Asher's. Today is a very good day. Finally, Willow exclaimed, I've been waiting forever for you two to kiss. Both adults laughed and Arthur felt something he hadn't felt in almost a year, complete. The months that followed were not perfect. Arthur still had bad days, days when the trauma of the wedding that wasn't haunted him, days when he struggled with his disability and the ways his life had changed, days when doubt crept in and whispered that maybe he wasn't enough. But Hugh was there always. He adapted his truck to make it easier for Arthur to transfer from his wheelchair, not because he asked, but because he paid attention and wanted to make his life easier. He learned about spinal cord injuries and accessibility and how to support him. Without infantilizing him, he introduced him to his family as his boyfriend with pride, not hesitation. And when Arthur's PT appointments were particularly brutal, he showed up with takeout and terrible movies and the understanding that sometimes love looked like just sitting together in comfortable silence. Arthur, in turn, was there for Hud. When work stress mounted, he listened. When Willow's seizures frightened him, he reminded him of his strength. When he doubted his abilities as a single parent, he showed him all the ways he was succeeding. They built a life together, not quickly, not perfectly, but authentically. 1 year after the garden, Hud took Arthur back to Redwood Creek Community Church. He'd been nervous about returning. The place still held painful memories. The suit, the tears, the humiliation, but Hud had asked him to trust him, and he did. They arrived in the late afternoon, the same spring sunlight filtering through the trees as it had that devastating May Day. Hud wheeled Arthur toward the side garden, and his breath caught. It was filled with white roses, dozens of them. Reese. What? He knelt beside his wheelchair at his level and took both his hands in his. Arthur, a year ago, I found you in this garden on what should have been the worst day of your life, and I've watched you transform that pain into strength. I've watched you reclaim your dreams, rebuild your confidence, and show me what real courage looks like. Tears were already streaming down his face. You've shown Willow what resilience means. You've shown me what it feels like to be truly seen and accepted. And you've proven that the right person doesn't see obstacles, they see opportunities too. Love better. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. The first suit you wore was meant for the wrong person, and I'm not trying to erase that day or pretend it didn't happen, but I want to give you a new memory, a better one. One where someone kneels beside you and asks not because they're settling, not because they're being noble, but because they genuinely cannot imagine their life without you. He opened the box, revealing a simple, beautiful ring. Arthur, will you marry me? At that moment, Willow appeared from behind a tree, holding a sign that read, Will you be my bonus dad? Arthur sobbed, full body shaking sobs of pure, overwhelming joy. Yes, he gasped. Yes, yes, 1,000 times. Yes. Hugh slipped the ring onto his finger, and Willow rushed forward, throwing her arms around both of them in a group hug. That felt like coming home. We love you, Arthur, Hud whispered in his hair. Just as you are always. 3 months later, they were married at Redwood Creek Community Church in a small, intimate ceremony. Arthur wore a simple white suit, nothing like the elaborate one from a year ago. He wheeled himself down the aisle, no one walking beside him, no one to give him away, because he was giving himself freely, fully, without reservation. Hud waited at the altar, Willow beside him in a yellow dress holding a small bouquet. When Arthur reached them, Hud knelt beside his wheelchair, and they held hands as the officiant spoke about commitment, about showing up, about the extraordinary power of ordinary love. Do you, HUD, take Arthur to be your husband, to stand by him in sickness and health, in joy and challenge for all the days of your life? I do, HUD said firmly. Absolutely. Without question. And do you, Arthur, take Reese to be your husband? Arthur looked at this man who'd found him broken and stayed until he was whole, who'd seen past the wheelchair to the person he was, who'd loved him not despite his challenges but including them. I do, he said, his voice strong and clear. When they kissed, the small gathering erupted in applause. Willow cheered the loudest. As they left the church that afternoon, HUD pushing Arthur's wheelchair while he held Willow's hand, Arthur looked back at the garden one more time. A year ago he'd sat in that spot, believing his life was over, believing he was unlovable, believing that the wheelchair had stolen his chance at happiness. But he'd been wrong. The wheelchair hadn't stolen anything, it had revealed everything. It had shown him who truly loved him and who didn't. It had filtered out the people who loved conditionally and introduced him to someone who loved unconditionally. Gideon had left because he saw his wheelchair as a barrier to the life he wanted. Reese had stayed because he saw Arthur as the life he wanted, and that made all the difference. Sometimes the worst day of your life is actually the doorway to the best chapter. Sometimes rejection from the wrong person makes space for acceptance from the right one, and sometimes a stranger in a garden becomes the love you never saw coming. This is Arthur and Reese's story, a reminder that real love doesn't walk away when life gets hard. Real love sits down in the grass and stays. Thanks for watching.